Kennedy of Pretty Peaceful. Thank you so much for joining me for the Cactus Garden Blanket Crochet Along. Today I'm going to show you two different styles of fringe to finish your Cactus Garden Blanket. And the first type of fringe we will take a look at is a simple single knotted fringe that I've done on my mini Cactus Garden Blanket here. So to get started, making this kind of really simple, but it's swishy, it's fun, it looks thick, it looks lush. We're going to add a piece of yarn to the end of each row of our yarn ends here. Because if we just tie the knots here, the fringe just looks a little bit thin, and we want nice, lush fringe. So I'm using my yarn bee for my fringe color here. And I'm going to cut 16-inch lengths of yarn, one for each row. And adding 16-inch pieces of yarn to the end of each row will let you have yarn that's about fringe that's about 6 inches long, which is a nice length. That's probably the maximum you'd want to go with for babies or small children. And it gives you a little bit of wiggle room so that if you're washing the blanket frequently, you can give it a little trim if the fringe starts to get fuzzy. So one per row, cut these lengths of yarn here. And we're going to use our crochet hook to add a piece of yarn to the end of each row, kind of right alongside the yarn ends here. Okay, so I've zoomed in a bit here. We're going to grab our length of yarn and fold it in half so that the ends meet up. And we're going to insert the hook into the end of the row, grab a loop. It's always easier on one side than the other. And catch the end of that doubled length of yarn, pull it through just a bit, and then tuck the ends through that little loop and tighten it. So let's do the next row, this pink row here. Insert the hook to grab a loop, and we will add a length of yarn, fold it in half, catch that with the hook, pull it through a bit, and tuck the ends in. Okay, so now that we've done 2 rows, we're going to gather 6 pieces of yarn together. So it's basically the ends of 2 rows plus those 2 pieces we just added. And we're going to just tie a regular overhand knot, just a single knot, and tighten it right up close to the end of the blanket. So there we have our first knot. Now we can move on to the next 2 rows here. So we'll grab another length of yarn, double it up, insert our hook into the end of this row, catch that loop, pull it through, and tighten it down. We'll do the one next to it also. So we'll insert our hook into the end of that pink row and pull it through. So now we have 2 rows done, and we're going to grab those 6 pieces of yarn and tie an overhand knot. Tighten it right up to the next to the blanket, and we have 2 pieces of fringe here. So I'm going to continue along the length of the blanket, adding one 16-inch long piece of yarn into the end of each row. You can grab 1 loop here or 2 loops, doesn't really matter. Just gotta attach that piece of fringe to the end of the row, and I like to go 2 rows at a time. You could add the fringe all the way across and then tie your knots all the way across, but I think it's a little bit easier for me to keep track of if I just do 2 rows at a time and gather those 6 pieces of yarn together. So in my blanket it's one yarn A, one yarn B, and then the 2 pieces of fringe I added in yarn B. And make the knot, pull it through, and tighten it right up next to the blanket. Do one more set of 2 rows here, fold the yarn in half, insert the hook into the end of the row, pull it through a little bit so you have a loop to stick the ends into, and tighten that down. One more row in our little cluster here. Pull it tight. Now we'll gather those 6 pieces of yarn and tie our knot. So once we've gone along the whole row, we will trim the fringe. Go back up a bit here to about 6 inches. And when you trim your fringe, you can put a tape measure up against the end of the blanket there and get your best scissors. Don't try to use ones that your kids have been cutting cardboard with. And when you trim the fringe, resist the urge to pull, because then it springs back and it shortens a little bit. You really only get one chance to cut it before you get too short, and you don't want fringe that's too short. So kind of measure up your tape measure. You can give it a gentle tug to straighten it, but once you have it straight, kind of release the pressure on it and cut it when it's relaxed, so you don't get that spring back and it's too short. Okay, the second type of fringe I'll show you is the macrame style fringe. This is what I've used on my small cactus garden blanket here, and it just consists of a series of knots tied with the yarn ends. We're not going to add any yarn onto this to make our fringe. We're just going to use the yarn ends. And so this is kind of the double knotted version here, where I've tied the knot just right up close to the edge of the blanket. 4 pieces of yarn together. And then I've taken half of that batch and tied it with 2 of that with the 2 from the next one into another knot, and then I tied a 3rd row of knots here. So it's really 3 rows of knots. If you would prefer a simpler fringe, you can just do 2 rows of knots, and that is what I've done here on my Cactus Garden baby blanket. Just one group of 4 yarn ends, 4 ends of 4 rows, tied together in one knot, and then I've taken 2 strands from each of these groups and tied them together in a second knot. So this is just a fun little macrame fringe variation. I think it just gives kind of a fancier edge to your blanket. So to get started, we are going to tie our yarn ends together. The very ends of the blanket, we are only going to tie 2 rows together, the ends of 2 rows together. And everything else we're going to do 4 rows together. So let me zoom in just a bit so we can see what I'm doing here. So here, the very end of our blanket, we're going to take just 2 rows and tie an overhand knot, tighten it up right close to the blanket. Then the next 4 rows here, grab 4 pieces of yarn, tie it in a knot, tighten it up closely to the blanket, and we'll continue along like that, tying groups of 4. Okay, once you've gotten groups of 4 all the way across your blanket, we're going to do that second row of knots. So you can split this group of 4 into 2. I like to split it into yarn A and yarn B groups. You can do it however you like. And you'll take the 2 on the end and 2 from the group next to it and tie 1 knot. I like to kind of use my finger as the spacer and tighten it just up about that far. And then tie another knot and tighten it up. Just close, about a finger width away. And then we'll take the remaining 2 from that first knot of 4 and tie it together with 2 from the next knot over. Tighten it kind of close up there. And tie that second knot, tighten up close. So we'll just continue along the blanket like this for our second row of knots. 2 and 2. Sometimes you can go back and do a little adjusting if they start to look uneven. So you can leave it as is at any point. If you like how it looks with just the first row of knots, then by all means, just tie the first row of knots and give your trim a fringe and you're done. If you want to keep going, keep going. Or if you don't like fringe at all, then go ahead and watch the border video for the Cactus Garden Blanket, which is just a very simple border to cover up all those ends. Or you can choose any border you like, a more complex border like Tina's double border for the Havana. So we've got our first row of knots, groups of 4, except for the one on the end, that's 2. We've got our second group of knots here, using 2 from each group. And if you like, you can go ahead and do a third row of knots. So basically, the one on the end is going to be a little lonely if you do a third row of knots. That's okay, just leave it on its own. And you just kind of repeat that last step where you're tying 2 from one group and 2 from the other group, and tighten it about a finger distance apart away there, and continue along the blanket. This is the same kind of fringe I did for my Modern Bohemian blanket. You can find pictures of that on Ravelry or on Facebook. It's just a really fun fringe, and I've been using that fringed blanket on our living room couch for over 4 years now, washing it quite frequently because I have 3 little boys, and I have had to trim the fringe a couple times just to neaten it up, but it still looks great. Some people I think have a worry that the fringe won't last, that it kind of tickles you in the face when you're using the blanket. But the fringe on this blanket's on the side, so I don't think that will be an issue. My husband did complain with the fringe on the ends tickling him a little bit when we first got the blanket, but it's really softened up now. Okay, so you can continue like that along the end, and maybe I'll go with 6 inches on this one. And continue along, giving your fringe a little haircut. And I hope you enjoy the fringe. Thank you so much for joining me, and please be sure to share your blankets. Continue to share on Ravelry and Facebook and Instagram. You can use hashtag Cactus Garden Blanket. And thank you for joining me. Bye.